7 o'clock. We have a quorum. Yay.
Woo-hoo.
A couple of folks won't be joining us tonight, and thanks for those who did. Continuing the thematic tour of Wellfleet budgets. Tonight it's all about the harbor, pretty much. And thank you to all three of you for coming in and giving your time to talk to us. We'll be talking about shellfish, and we're talking about harbor and the Marina Enterprise Fund, and get a reasonable idea of where we are with dredging. And that's pretty much it. And if we're expeditious, it'll be cookies and milk, and
Night,
there
night,
you go.
night, night.
So, just a couple of quick housekeeping things.
Yes.
Nancy sent a revised budget request, and I have copies for everybody, so if you don't have,
Yeah, I
please,
didn't print
please
it.
take it.
Thank you.
And we will not be looking at the
You have a
minutes
copy?
tonight because Rebecca is still recovering.
Okay.
And as we said at the last meeting, and I think it'll be true for this meeting as well, assuming that there's film in that canister, the videographer only knows best. I'm kidding about the film, by the way.
What's film?
Exactly.
So from
I
a
understand-
canister, yeah.
I understand we're in the digital age, and assuming that there is a sound digital file at the end of this,
With the needle.
we will
on
get
it.
minutes off the meeting at some point in the near future. That's it. Having said that, I'd like to ask Nancy Tsvetka to come up. If you could pull your chair up over here, or I'll get you another chair. Yeah? Can we do that? And then this is for the benefit of the videographer,
Thank you.
Mia Baumgarten, professional videographer, likes to have people speaking in the direction of the mics.
Did you get that free hair and makeup before you came in?
I didn't.
Anybody
Never
that
need
sits
it.
in that
Well,
face gets the.
you never kind of need it. You're always video ready, I would say.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming everybody's had a chance, and we've talked to you not that long ago,
Yeah.
so we have a
Yep.
pretty good idea of, well, a lot of the elements of the budget, but if you'd like to spend a few minutes kind of reviewing the high points and particularly what's happening with the additional request and all.
Sure. I thought I would start out by saying I just got some preliminary information from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And based on their preliminary reports in 2019, Wellfleet was again #1 for the value of its shellfish landings in the state. We came in at 7.7 million. So again, for our small town of 3,100 people, it's a pretty impressive number. About 25% of the working age population in this town is involved in the shellfishing industry. So it's
You
it's
said
definitely
25%?
25% of the working age population is involved in the shellfishing industry in some form. And it certainly is what makes this town tick on a year-round basis.
Year-round is the key, I have to say.
It's true.
Wonderful that we have a vibrant year-round community.
I agree. So in my, I had originally sent along, again, the look ahead memo that I had forwarded in December of last year after we met. Just kind of looking down the line at what the department might need in the future. And one of the things that I thought within 5 years would be an extra employee, a fourth full-time year-round employee. And that's what I had originally asked for. After meeting with the Shellfish Advisory Board and just trying to be creative, I guess, what I decided to do was for this year, I still believe that we need it, but I'm gonna try something. So I withdrew that and I submitted an $8,000 request for a part-time seasonal employee that would cover the recreational fishery. So what I think we need a full-time employee for is the amount of work that it takes to adequately monitor our booming aquaculture business. So by hiring somebody to fill in at the recreational fishery during our busy summer months, it will allow me to pull the full-time seasonal worker and put him, he's been with us for 2 years now, put him on commercial patrol, freeing myself up, hopefully, to then be able to dedicate a bit more time to grants. And let's see if I can get my head around and the department feel comfortable with operations regarding grants in this way. So the town administrator agrees, he's included it in his budget, and I would say that that's probably the biggest change. I also have some increases in my different lines of my budget here, and that is just trying to bring this department up to the level that it needs to be. It's a department that has been overlooked, and it is a department that has flown under the radar. And the more that I am with the department, it's been 2.5 years now, the more I'm learning, I'm looking at actual expenditures, and I'm trying to create a budget that reflects the work that we do and the amount that it costs to run the department. So, the only other thing that we had discussed briefly at the last meeting was the third truck. It's not the third truck, it's the replacement truck that I put in for the capital improvement plan. I have since withdrawn as well the Upweller request. Johnny and I just felt like dredging is probably gonna have an impact on how and when we can operate that. So we've got 3 years of dredging coming up, and I wanna kind of see how the first year goes before we just dive right in. However, the other thing that we had discussed was the maintenance plan for rotating trucks into the department every 5 years. We already have taken delivery of our third truck. It's at the DPW waiting for license plates, and that's great because our black truck is in the shop and has been for 10 days, and we are down to 1 truck right now trying to patrol the fishery, do grant inspections, and monitor boats. So I think that we did good to plan on 3 trucks because they're just not always going to be.
What's wrong with that truck?
Which one?
The one that's in the shop now? Is it something that's?
It has to do with the 4-wheel drive,
Okay.
going in and out of 4-wheel drive, and it needed a new water pump. That went into the shop right after we got the white truck back, which is the 2016 truck, which is scheduled for, this is the 2021 replacement vehicle. We just had to replace the drive shaft in that. It just broke in half at the pier. So, these trucks take a beating.
Mhm.
They are on patrol more than any other vehicle in the town, except for the police. We work 364 days a year. We patrol tides 4 hours a day, probably 50 miles a tide. And, in the summer months and when there's daylight from March to November, we can do 2 tides a day, every other week. So, no amount of washing them down
That's not
is gonna
it's
protect
just gonna
them
corrode.
from the
Yep.
long-term effects. And, it's public safety. A month doesn't go by where we're not towing somebody out, so
Yep.
we need our trucks to work.
A couple of quick questions. In terms of the trucks, and I'm completely ignorant on this. Are there any customized vehicles that are built particularly or specifically to operate in the conditions that you operate in, as opposed to getting one, you go down and buy a pickup, you maybe coat the bottom of it, and that's your truck, as opposed to somebody makes a truck that is specifically for running, on sand and at the seashore and dealing with salt water and,
Not that I know, unless like an amphibious tugboat.
yeah, like that.
No, not that I know.
Okay, yeah, I had a
But
feeling
we
that.
do that undercoating to our trucks.
Sure,
It's part of the
I-
specs that we
Well, I assumed you
request.
would, yeah, but I thought maybe somewhere there was somebody who had, a specialized vehicle for this kind of thing.
Mhm.
there's another thing, but I forgot what
So,
it was.
while you're thinking,
Yep.
so grants, why, many departments in this town need grants. Why are the department heads writing their own grants? Why isn't there a grant specialist
So
writing grants for Wellfleet?
I might have, so I might be confusing you. When I talked about grant, I'm talking about a farm, an aquaculture farming operation.
A
The
shellfish
the town licenses,
I'm sorry, I thought that you said that you were writing, that you needed time for grants.
For
And
grants.
I thought that you were writing grants.
No, I have written
my bad.
grants to SPAT. I've brought in $30,000 to the department over 2 years by
Okay.
writing grants to SPAT.
So there's no overall state grants that you are writing or something like that? Okay,
No, when I
sorry.
say, I'm talking about oversight of farms. Thank you,
Okay,
because
sorry.
that's important. Not everybody's gonna know that. And so even when I'm talking certainly in television, it's important to understand that we have 134 farm leaseholders in the town, that the town leases intertidal bottom to run shellfish farms. And because a lot of these get, they're different parcels and they get farmed together, the state considers that we have 90-plus farms in this town, the most of any other town in the state, almost by double.
How does the purchase of the trust property figure into that? Is that figuring in at this point as part of the grants? Has any of that been parsed out yet, or is
No,
that's
I
not
believe-
yet on the?
So, most of the area over there is already being farmed.
Okay.
And you can't put a farm where there's natural wild production of shellfish.
Okay.
And most of Wellfleet Harbor is naturally productive, so we wouldn't probably.
Okay, so that parcel that we purchased, and forgive my ignorance, Bob's probably looking at, why don't you know this? I don't know this, so I'm gonna ask the question.
Sure.
So that's mostly wild farming, and whatever's already been parceled out as people that are existing farmers on that space, and we don't expect any increase to your activity based on the acquisition of that land. That's
I
kind of my
don't,
question.
so until I feel like the department has a handle on how many farms, on the amount of farms and activity that we have right now, I don't feel comfortable creating a new farm, which I don't think we could anyways, because it's naturally productive, so you can't take it out of natural wild productivity and put it as a farm to
Okay.
private enterprise. And two, I would not feel comfortable even granting extensions to farms at this point. Sometimes people are looking for extra acreage, but I don't feel like we have our finger on the pulse yet of everything that's going on out there. So I'm just uncomfortable doing that. And I want to give our team 2020 to really make it a focal point, do some shifting around of responsibilities, and see how we feel at the end of 2020.
Okay.
Fred, can I ask a
Yeah,
good
of course.
question? So the grants that are on there, they're gonna stay, we're not gonna have any new grants. So then what happens to the wild, like, does that mean it's open for wild picking?
Yeah, it always has been.
Oh, okay, so
Mhm.
owning it or not owning it hasn't changed that.
Hasn't changed, it can't change that because there's the colonial ordinances of 1647 that protects fish, fowl, and navigating. Fishing.
So there's no potential.
So that's just what I was
But
gonna
there-
try to get a handle
No
on, if
potential
there
for
was.
grant money.
Right, but there are commercial shellfish or people who do wild.
Right, picking the wild.
So the status quo of the land production
Stays
stays the same, and then,
exactly.
yeah.
Which means that, it just means it can't go into private hands and be like cordoned off.
So the other question I had, looking at the overall budget,
Should know that.
has anything
Yeah, you do.
changed significantly from what we're looking at here?
Um,
Are there,
No, the only change was, so actually, Dan added in the $8,000. He added it in, like, when I have it's $8,000 more than 264 plus 8 is now 272. So he went ahead and added it in to his TA budget.
okay, so this number
So-
here, the 19,288.
Is
will
now
end up being
27.
27 and change.
27,288, yep. And I have not changed anything else. Now, something that's interesting for this year to think about. Last year, we received a approval to do a revolving fund. So from now on, 75% of the revenue that we take in shellfish permit sales, so wild and recreational and commercial shellfishing permits, and in farm fees, $25 an acre we collect from each leaseholder, which is it's a little shy of $100,000 each year that we take in, at least since I've been here for the past 2.5 years. So 75% of that is now going to go into a shellfish revolving fund for propagation. And then 25% is available to the general fund. This means that the users are paying, not the taxpayers, for the propagation that we're doing to benefit. And so last year we were approved for $5,000. And we're hopefully going to use that to fund a permitting process that we need to do to continue our propagation efforts. But Dan this year took $40,000 from there and is putting it into line 180. So instead of requesting $46,000, which would have been level funded for the past 2 years, we're requesting $6,000. So I look at it as I'm trying to get budget line 179 in order. It's an increase along the lines of, I think, let me just see.
30,000 or more.
There's a percentage of a 15% increase in the 179, I believe, if I'm following Dan's calculations. But the 180, so they're both shellfish budgets, 180 is down 87%. So I feel like, while I'm trying to get this 179 in order, we're already cutting down on 180. So
Okay,
we're coming out ahead for taxpayers.
I'm not seeing these same numbers. I'm not.
179 and
following.
180 are the
These are
budget
these are
numbers.
these.
Sorry.
They're not the,
So this is
this is budget
so-
179 and that's budget 180.
Oh, I see.
So the
Thank you.
$40,000.
I get it, thank you.
Yeah, that's the confusion.
So add $8,000 to the bottom line of the 264, 384, and you get like whatever it is, 272.
72.
Yep.
And then take the number that would have been B1, 2, and 3 and decrease it by 40,000. And they, if I understand what you're saying, they more or less balance out.
They don't. I mean, we're still saving more money. So we were up, I guess I'd have to do the numbers.
That's not really, it's not
Well, it's
really
up 32,
saving
down
money, it's just
34.
applying previous year's funds to it, so.
Right.
Right.
It's not coming out of
It's not a cut.
taxpayers.
Yeah.
the revolving-
It's
Not
just-
taxpayers.
yeah,
It's
it's
the revolving
fine.
fund beginning to do what
No, I
it's
just
supposed
wanted
to
to,
do.
no, I
It's
just didn't
coming
wanna
out of
say,
users,
I just didn't
not
want
taxpayers.
that you're not, yeah.
Right.
That's,
So I need, I want to try and get this 179, which is our operating budget. Each year I'm learning something new. So getting that in line means we're going to be, it's a little bit of an increase, but then by having initiated the revolving fund, that's
Yeah.
no longer coming out
that
of
it's gonna,
taxpayer
yeah, it's
pockets.
come from usage. Yep.
So, just so I'm clear on this, because we're not looking at a full-time replacement, the addition of a part-time replacement will be baked into the budget and will not be a line item on the warrant,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
And, well, that was a question, really.
I just want to point something out though. According to the personnel bylaws, that piece in there that I thought we got rid of is still there, which is any new positions, which includes part-time. The creation of any new positions shall require the approval of the personnel board.
So I
So
want
we're
to
gonna-
clarify, so this position's already been there, it's not new.
When was it approved?
I've had it for 2 years now. There's been a recreational patrol person for the past 2 years.
You have that, you're adding somebody else.
You're adding-
But
you're adding-
it's not, the way that the town administrator explained it to me, like even if I wanted an additional employee, it's still a deputy constable, and a deputy constable exists already. So I wasn't
So
gonna have
one
Existing
deputy-
definition.
it,
No.
the description of the
The existing
position would be
definition is different.
deputy
So you have a
constable.
deputy how many deputy constables do you have right now?
We have one.
You have one.
I was requesting a second deputy
Okay.
constable.
So it is a new position.
But it's not, it's
Okay. Well,
only
I
if
think
you're,
we need to
you're
get
creating a
clarification from
brand
town
new
council.
position.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we do, though. It sounds like this is
Well,
something.
the only
that-
reason why I'm saying it is because I'm on the personnel board,
Right.
and plus I thought they eliminated that, which I was for, but all of a sudden it's still there, so now.
So I asked for clarification with the town administrator, and
Yeah.
this is how he guided me.
Yeah,
But I think
I want
you're right,
town
between the
councils-
personnel board and you and the town administrator, before we get to approving, it's almost a moot point if we approve the budget or recommend it, and it turns out that for whatever reason, this position has to be vetted in a different way, it's sort of irrelevant what we say, as far as that goes.
Yeah, this
Right.
position, we started out with a recreational patrol person,
I'm gonna have
which was part-time, and then the recreational patrol person went to full-time, was sworn in as a deputy, and so then that person will be the part-time, full-time seasonal deputy, and I'm backfilling that recreational patrol
Yes, so
part-timer.
no, on that, I agree with that it may be the position that is now open because of the promotion of another person, but it doesn't, I don't think that necessarily, that you can infer from that you have an additional FTE in your mom.
It's out of our scope.
Yeah, it's not
Or
a full-time.
Or PTE,
Yeah.
Well, if you've had 3 people and then there's a 4th person, it seems like there's an.
that's an
There's an
another
add
position.
to, there's an add to,
Right.
so the description of the position might exist, but the add to quantity of billable hours is an
Right.
increase, so that's I think where the,
Right,
Could we reasonably expect that sometime in the next 2 or 3 weeks, this question will get answered?
we have all the way up until town
Definitively.
meeting, but it's just,
Yeah,
I was
this
looking for
is a
something else
Yeah.
completely
town
different, and I
administrative
stumbled
thing, not
on
a
this, and I
Nancy.
thought we voted, because there was a charter review thing 2 years ago, and I thought they eliminated that, but apparently they haven't, so, and being on the personnel board, so.
Nancy, I apologize, I came in late and missed this, but I'm assuming that the increase in repair and maintenance and in gas, diesel is the addition of another truck?
That's correct.
That's all.
What reporting or system do you have to quantify your efforts in the propagation field? Does you have in other words, how are we gonna know that all this money we're throwing at it is doing any good or not? Is there any oversight by the Shellfish Advisory, or is it all internal?
We present our propagation plan each year to the Shellfish Advisory.
Well, the plan is one thing.
Yep.
Implementation and success or failure is another thing. My question is, if you have 10 years and it's been 10 years of failure, at what point do you say, okay, well, let's back off a little bit because it's not working? So that's my question. There's gotta be some, if you expect the town to give you all this money, you've gotta come up with a system of quantifying success or failure. Period. And that should be every department, but this is a unique thing where you could see it or be able to quantify it, I would think. You have all these bodies to quantify it, you're asking for someone to quantify it, right?
Yeah, I think it's hard to
That's in your job
quantify Mother
description.
Mother Nature. Like, we can do all we're gonna do, but if ice comes in and takes it all away, is that our problem? I mean, is that our fault because we didn't do
No,
propagation
ice
effectively?
is one thing, if there's no ice, then that's another thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying, you've gotta, to be fair to the town, you've gotta come up with some plan of showing us one way or another. Because we can continue throwing money at something, and if it doesn't work, then the town has to rethink its funding, I would think.
So let me ask a question, because I know nothing about your world in terms of quantifying success and failure. And I'm only asking the question because if it touches on the FinCom at all, it touches on it, as I understand the question, in terms of whether we think this is a reasonable amount to spend. it sounds to me like you would need to have maybe one of, or two things. One is some sort of standard for how you would quantify, so that everybody agrees, yeah, this is a measure that we all agree on, and then you'd have to have a history. 1 year is not gonna do it, to the point about the ice. If you have 2 bad winters in a row, you may not get an accurate picture of what success means if you looked at it over 10 years. So how does, if it hasn't been happening to date, in a sense, we're at the starting gate of quantification, how do we then use that information to make a coherent decision about what's worth spending money on, is the question.
Yeah.
So
So
isn't,
one of the things that I do is, and this initiated with the beginning of a recreational patrol person, for example, where we have somebody working the flocks and quantifying, nobody ever measured it, so quantifying how much product is coming off, oysters, clams, steamers, whatever, and then putting a dollar amount to that, which is always in my annual report. What would that translate into on a plate at a raw bar? And just understanding that, the town is making this investment, and that's what I put in the very first paragraph here. The town's making an investment of money, but this is what's coming out, for example, of the recreational fishery, and just trying to make sure that, so for example.
so let me ask you a question more. Whatever you're creating with this program can't be taken by people with commercial licenses.
Yes, they can. Yeah,
They
so
can.
we distribute our seed and the Cohog relay that we do, Culch, we distribute it throughout the harbor so that both commercial and recreational harvesters have access to it. What was I just, okay, so for example, a rough estimate of our recreational catches was about 73,000 oysters, which would cost at least $146,000 on a raw bar plate.
Why do you keep saying recreational when we're also giving
That was just
to the
one number.
commercial? Okay, but
The value of the commercial fishery is 7.7 million. I don't know yet whether,
Well,
I would have
that's
to
all
ask
grants,
this,
that's
I would
not-
have to separate out,
no, I'm not trying to put you on the
aquaculture and
spot. I'm just
wild.
confused.
yes.
Because my impression was that this whole program is what you throw it in and then the recreational people take it and pay license fees that then pays for it. But am I wrong?
So any revenue to the Shellfish Department, whether from grant fees, so fees that farmers pay, to $25 an acre, or a commercial permit holder pays $310, a recreation, depending, how much, if you live here, don't live here, seasonal. So recreational permits, commercial permits, and grant fees, license fees, are what fund the Shellfish Fund.
So maybe if you
The Culture
qualify,
program, but we're talking about the Culture program. Right?
right, well, then the buying
Talk about
seed from the
propagation in
hatchery.
general.
Oh,
Yeah, but they're getting seed clams from polluted areas, from hatchery, both. They're getting natural wild-caught oysters. They're also buying oysters from hatchery. My question is, what is the ratio for recreation to commercial? 20-80, 50-50?
Of where we put stuff?
Right.
I bet it would be a little, well, see, a lot of times what we do is we put them in areas that both can access. So we'll do a bit on Indian Neck, but then we'll do stuff in Chipman's or Blackfish Creek or Lieutenant Island, where 8 months of the year that's open to both. Herring River we do a lot in, and that's commercial only. So I would say we definitely do, if you look at Herring River and Indian Neck recreational only area, it probably is more like an 80-20, but I'm just,
Yeah, no, it's hard to
it's hard
quantify.
to, yeah.
Right. Well, at some point, I think those numbers should show up somehow. I mean,
I wonder whether tracking landings and seeing if there's an increase in permit sales, certainly from When I started, there's been 20, let's see, maybe 20 to 40 permits, more commercial permits have been sold. Recreational has been fairly level since I started. I was,
Well, you have a propagation czar, Johnny.
mhm.
He should have a handle on what he's putting in and what is coming out. Basically, I mean, if you put 100% of something and they're all dead, then that didn't work. If you put 50,000 and then you quantify 45,000 came out, pretty successful.
Mhm.
And it also would tell you, well, maybe that's not a good idea, maybe we should try something else. My point is that I think you've got to have some hard numbers so that you at least know what not to do.
Mhm.
If this is what happens on a grant all the time. You're always getting mortality and say, uh-oh, bad idea, let's try something else.
Right.
I'm learning every year.
Yeah.
And we all are, so that's my only point.
Well, one thing, we have not had any significant mortality of oyster seed, and we just planted the past 2 years quahog seed, so this year will be a day of reckoning, or, a
Right.
year of reckoning.
No, I know you're
so-
in the neophyte stages of the whole system. but,
Yeah, so.
If I was putting the effort into it, I'd want to know what
Mhm.
was coming out,
Yep,
basically. So,
So, I'm not sure, one of the things we've started to do, talking about being in the neophyte stages, one of the things that we started to do as a FinCom is to ask department heads where it's possible to project forward 2 to 3 years, often just in terms of saying, where do you see your big costs coming from? But it's also potentially, where do you see new revenues coming from? It's also, do you see growth or do you not see growth, and that kind of thing. Again, not knowing this business very well, it does seem to me as I'm reading through the materials, though, that while the impact of your budget overall is not huge relative to the entire Wellfleet budget, it does describe, it's sort of a meta view of a series of businesses, right? It's not like a business, you're talking about individual grants, you're talking about recreational versus commercial. There's an industry involved here that we're trying to get a picture of, and if I understand some of the concerns going forward, it's that if in any industry you always want to measure whether you're doing well or not, whether you're being successful or not. Is this, you make an investment here, is it a good investment versus making an investment there?
mm-hmm.
Some of them are practical, like we're gonna get another truck. Truck is easy to understand. Culch and propagation and upwellers and all of that stuff is a lot harder to understand, but it should have an outcome, is kind of the way I'm hearing it, is that, and I don't think this is something you owe us particularly as a FinCom, but it would be useful in future conversations if you had a set of metrics that you said, okay, when I do these things, I have a way to measure them going forward, and I'm gonna start to build those metrics year over year to see if I'm making good investments or not, because that will play back to the budget. You say, well, last year you wanted so much for this, but it wasn't a great idea for whatever reason, we're gonna divert that money or put it somewhere else. Right now, we're flying blind a little bit, only in the sense that only one of us really understands your business.
Yeah.
And so, sure, it looks good or doesn't look good, we have no idea.
Well, I'll definitely ask Chatham and Barnstable, as Chatham doesn't have really any aquaculture, but they have a big wild fishery, as do we. And Barnstable is the closest to us, even though they have much less aquaculture, but they, they're
They may have they may have figured out what
right.
metrics
So
to
I'll
use,
see,
yeah.
how do they track their propagation inputs versus outputs, and what kind of metrics might they use? I'll definitely do that.
Could I ask you a related question, sort of related? Well, are there any spots where there are future grants available? Are we maxed out as far as that's concerned? Is there any?
I feel
potential
like
for-
we're maxed out
Okay.
because we have such productive bottom. Oysters are
I
everywhere.
had no idea
Yeah.
whether the town is, may have additional grants to lease at some point or not.
So what will happen is, if somebody is aging out and doesn't have a protege that they want to hand it a grant down to, then they would hand it back to they should always be handed back to the town.
Right.
But the Wellfleet allows up to 4 names on a farm, so, it is a way to plan the succession. And also, part of what is being asked of us is to enforce on people who aren't meeting the minimum productivity requirements of our regulations. And so that is another way that some grants might come available.
Okay. And do you have an idea of how many people make their livings off the fishery?
So we calculate, I want to say it's between 450 and 500 people. And that's including employees, and not all employees are full-time, but it's the
Right.
amount of people that it touches. And when I do that math with census data, it's about 25% of the working aged population in Wellfleet.
Okay.
And then there's stores that stay open, grocery stores and places that sell
Oh,
lunch.
farms.
I was asking
Huge
specifically how many
community.
people are
Yeah.
making their money from the
No,
fishery
no, but
itself.
that's always, that
Of
should be,
course,
thought
I
it
was
was
just
included. I do, anyway.
Curious, but I'm more curious.
In
as to what-
1890, 90% was touched by the oyster industry.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, we're building up. Nancy's only been here for 3 years.
I know.
There we go.
Well on our way.
Building up.
On our way.
I have to say, once again, I'm completely impressed that this town is a year-round town. And I really feel that in the middle of January when I run around and it's not closed up and boarded up. And it had been for some years ago. And it's not.
It's the 70s, you're dating yourself.
I am dated now. I'm very dated, but.
Too late, he's married.
At a minimum, there are FinCom meetings in January.
What did I say? I don't even hear what I said.
Okay.
Year-round.
Anybody have any other questions for Nancy?
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And as
Thank
I
you.
said before, we're going to hold off on recommendations, and it does sound like it would be worth getting an answer to Stephen's
Just for
question about
clarification,
personnel.
because-
So who do
I
am
mean,
I
I'm-
supposed to ask
No,
that? or-
I'll do
Okay.
that, because I just didn't want to have a
It's
personnel
not like,
board meeting.
you know, like
You'll
two
talk
boards
later.
in
No,
one.
you don't want to
tonight.
stub your toe on that and find out,
Aw.
that,
You
it's
don't
not
have
gonna
to-
I thought I
happen
did
because
my
of
due
some
diligence.
arcane
I thought-
1647
Yeah,
rule.
yeah.
Hi.
You may have to go back and look at the
I
reference.
do.
Thanks, Nancy.
Yeah, thank you. We'll change seats.
Switch.
But
Change your guys.
Got your hair and makeup?
Thank Mike Flanagan, Harbor Master, and
one meeting.
Bon Vivant for joining us.
Hi, Mike. Hair and makeup.
I've grabbed my license.
We'll find this budget under enterprise funds, I believe.
I know.
Yep.
This is Volunteers last.
I have one big project
Huh?
aside from the budget. What's with all the
One big
boats?
line, just
Oh.
add it up
All
and
the
stick it
What's
up.
with all the boats on the marine?
Oh, I
See,
see.
this was last year, and then we,
Are there more than usual?
filled at 10%.
I don't know. Might be a new
for-
revenue
for-
stream.
This is what I came up with, but he's gonna give
All
me
the
the
boats
list.
on the marina.
Yeah.
as opposed to in the
That's
water.
what I- Yeah.
Well, they probably can't get out of the marine.
Yeah.
So
We've had this for a while.
what's that? This budget's
I never
correct.
got him.
So is there a significant change to it?
No.
Okay, good.
There never
Thanks for
is.
coming.
Never is.
Okay, thank
So
you.
one thing quickly, I don't want to bury the lead on this, but I understand that, and by burying the lead, I mean, I don't want to overly anticipate what Chris is going to be talking about, but I understand that part of the difference in this year's budget presupposes that dredging is going to be happening and that there'll be a necessity for more oversight of that process. And I don't know where the chicken and the egg is in this scenario. If the dredging doesn't
You mean
happen,
as far as wages or salaries?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So please feel free to speak to that, and I'll shut up. And here we go.
Well, yeah, we plan to get, Dan gave us, I believe, like a 10% increase in pay for next year for that reason that you just stated. I was actually looking to have the marina crew you know, what's the word I'm looking for?
More engaged.
Well, we'd like to get the positions, not reevaluated, what is it?
Reassessed.
Stabilized?
Reclassified.
Everybody.
Reclassified, yes. And it wouldn't be just because of the dredging that's happening, it's because of the other duties that we have at the marina, one being the fuel dock. You know, that, the harbor master department took over the operation of that, and we never really received any recognition for doing that, and it's a significant addition to our workload. And so for years I've been trying to be reclassified, but nothing seems to be happening. But, you know, I'm very happy to have the 10% or whatever it is increase for the next fiscal year in the full-time salaries. And the other addition I had in salaries would be an additional 10,000 for seasonal employees. It's been very difficult to keep good help. And, you know, we depend on our seasonal guys in season because it's very busy down there.
How many do you have now?
We have, last year we had three seasonal employees.
Three
and-
full-time during the day. In other words, seasonal but full-time.
Yes, two
Two.
seasonal, and they stay on, but they don't go over the certain amount of hours to stay part-time. So I wanted to raise that $10,000 so that we could give them an increase in pay to try to keep the,
Try to prevent them from leaving mid-season.
yes.
Yeah, I get it.
I think Dan agreed with that.
Yeah, the folks you have are doing a great job. They're very-
Thank you.
Very, well, not that you weren't friendly, but I'm saying. I noticed that they're, you know, they're very helpful.
Yeah, we pride ourselves on helping the boating
Yeah.
public, not, you know, being the big authoritarians that
Right.
say, you can't do this, you can't do
That's
that.
really
We
important.
want to see people enjoy themselves,
Yeah.
because they'll come back, and
Yeah.
that's really what we want.
Come back and spend more money.
Do your part-time employees come back year after year, or are we hiring
They
new
have,
people?
yeah.
Have we have okay, so you have some longevity, so you can save on, you know, training and getting them up and going and time like that?
Yeah, they know the ropes, that's why I like to keep.
And now if they have a little increase, then it's more of an incentive for them to come back, which is
Yeah.
saving on the other end, so, good.
The gas tanks, were they to be replaced this year, or have they been?
They haven't been, we do have the RFP out, and GEI got that, and they're working on the plan and the permitting and that kind of thing.
So you expect that to happen this year?
I'm not sure if it'll happen this, yeah, maybe in 2020 it should happen, we're hoping next fall.
Please
I don't
not.
think we could get to it this spring.
Because we had that insurance issue with tanks too.
Well, you were funded for it, right, last
Yes,
Town
Should be, that
Quarter
should
million
be
or-
being replaced this year.
yes,
400,000.
I think it was
Hmm?
500,000.
So that's just sitting there in a high interest yielding
I
bond fund, right?
Yeah,
So could I ask you a question about revenues?
sure.
Winter storage, last year, like fiscal year 2019, you had budgeted, you had estimated $4,500 in revenue, and there was none. And this year, you didn't have any budgeted in fiscal year 20. But this year, for 21, you're anticipating $5,000. What's going on?
Well, we've been having a tough time collecting. And this year, we went to the Board of Selectmen at a public hearing to try to increase the fees for storage. And we thought that would kind of get the ball rolling so that we could, you know, send out bills and people would pay them instead of ignoring them. And that went pretty well. We didn't really get what we wanted, but, you know, it was a start.
I don't understand,
So-
they store the boat there,
They're
Yeah,
supposed to
here.
pay for it.
they're supposed to pay for it,
And they
then
don't.
they take their boat back in the spring, and they don't pay?
yeah.
Okay, I'm assuming you don't let them come back the next year.
Well, we do. Most of them are commercial people, and have you ever heard?
Okay.
Somebody
Okay, that's
trying-
all you have to say. Okay, fine.
Well,
No
Um,
problem.
so now, just so that, what about those houses? Is that part of winter storage? Those people?
The
that-
houses, that's part of Mike Winkler's deal.
Okay,
I've allowed him to keep his houses there for the past several years. In exchange, he came down 2 years ago and installed 40 pilings, anchor pilings for our docks, 40 of them. For, we bought it, I gave him the dockage, he gave us the 40 pilings driven.
That works.
It works very well for the marina.
Yeah, that's a bargain.
Yeah.
And we hope this spring he'll be back to do the fender piles.
That seems reasonable.
And like next year,
But that seems like-
Provincetown has a new wave attenuating
Yeah.
system up there, so he'll probably keep them up there, but that came just in time for us.
Well, that's okay. So the select board had no interest in helping you, they're getting you some help in enforcing collection on the
Well,
storage?
with the new fee schedule, we're working on withholding like shellfish licenses or something
Right.
else if they haven't paid all their debt.
It's like a parking ticket.
Is the word,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, what do
Can't
you-
you just
what-
add it into the fee, like, here's your
What do you
commercial license,
charge?
$300 and,
It's I assume
400
it's
if you
by
sell
the
it
foot or
yourself.
something, but what is an average person,
For storage,
yeah.
it was $1,500 last year. This year we changed it to break it up so the smaller boats wouldn't have to pay that same fee.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, both the fees came down, so.
How?
Actually, one of them, the one we wanted to bring in was vessels under 25 feet at a reduced rate, and I think $500 for that, and then I believe it was $750 for boats over that.
All right,
Yeah,
that makes no sense to me.
I,
Then it's less expensive than if they had to
Right.
store it,
yes, and that was the point I was trying to make.
right?
Whether it's stored on the parking area or in the water, it's
Right.
still storage using town property.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there should be a
Put a
fee.
lock on their wheels or something so that they can't throw the boat out without.
And the other thing about that was, years ago, people would put their boat up there and then leave it.
Oh, yeah.
Boats have remained on the
Right.
pier for like
Abandoned.
5 years or
Oh, that's not
something, and then
cool.
I'd have to pay to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Get rid of it, yeah.
Yeah,
You could use them as rental property. Like have somebody move in the winter.
auction them off.
A question, it looks to me like the charges for services and the diesel have gone up kind of commensurate with the cost of personnel in order to get a balance. So total receipts and total expenses zero out. Was that intentional, dollar for
No,
dollar, or did it just kind of work out that way?
It kind of worked out that way. I think Dan took the lead and,
Found a way to
yeah.
did have one other question.
What's retained earnings transfer?
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, that was the question, exactly.
I was hoping it transferred back into the enterprise fund.
Well, it
it's
is
part of
under receipts, so, yeah, we may need to address that question to Dan.
So that might be that might be what he was using to zero it out.
Okay.
It doesn't quite get there, though. It's not,
Is it, were you over budget
Last.
last year? Isn't it?
No, I think
It's not
we
budget
did it.
surplus.
So the
right?
19 actual was less than the fiscal year budget by about 56,469. If you do that math, are you doing that math already? I'm wondering if that's He's playing crossword puzzles.
So, two other things too. Could you really
Dual
briefly
return.
describe B26 to B29, just what they are?
Okay, the debt principal, that's the expense every year to pay down the note for the
Actually, more than-
marina renovation.
Okay.
When we did the revetment, the paving, and just redid the whole marina, put the sidewalk in.
How many years are we into that now?
That's a good question. I believe it was a 20-year note, and, well, it's coming down somewhat.
Halfway there.
10 years.
Yeah, we're about
66,
halfway.
460.
Okay. And the reserve contingency comes from where? Is that just a,
That's just what
just a placeholder?
I try to put in my budget so that if there's any emergencies or contingencies, I'll
Right.
have money to pay for it.
And the indirect costs?
That's the cost of insurance, shared employees, that's the one I like. And the other, insurances and that sort of thing.
Like health insurance and.
Yes.
And a more general question, and I'm not a boater, so again, I'll plead complete ignorance on this, sort of anecdotal, that as a result of the channel silting up, people said it's getting harder and harder to get boats in and out of Wellfleet. You have to time it with low tide much more closely than you used to, and is that affecting your revenues, or is it affecting?
yes,
I mean, to what degree, I guess, if
I'd say significantly, especially with the transient traffic that we usually make some good money on.
right.
We've seen that decline pretty significantly.
And yet revenues are projected to go up.
Yes, actually, because we added a new source, we start collecting $10 per boat to come in and tie up for lunch.
Huh.
So
There you go.
we're
That's
doing all right
hard.
with that.
And the
Right.
parking seasonal is for Oyster Fest, right?
Yes, we do have seasonal parking at the pier for, especially sailboats who, don't.
Day
Don't
sailors,
it?
people who go out for the day and
Yeah,
come
they
back.
take them out, leave them on the marina for $1,500, and then they can use it, launch it anytime they want to use it. They don't have to demast it and that sort of thing.
So that's actually parking for their boat.
Yes,
Okay, got it. And so the revenue under parking seasonal includes that
Yeah,
and the Oyster Fest revenue.
Oyster.
yes.
Okay, cool.
Do you envision, and I assume it would flow to your budget, having parking on the pier itself, paid parking at some point? I know it's been an open item for,
I have
Few years
thought about,
now.
I think it was about 10 years ago or something, I suggested something like that.
still not gonna happen yet, I guess.
Well, the parking task force is having a meeting, I want to say, the beginning of next month, maybe the 12th, or
Now that-
something like that.
Now that there are systems to, the kiosk systems where so we don't have to actually staff a booth, it's much more
Yeah,
possible
like
than it would
P-Town,
have
where
been.
you like pay at a.
Much more
pay,
possible
put
than
the
it would have
stick
been
your
10
ticket
years
in or
ago.
whatever.
Because that was one of the big objections, is having to pay.
It's having
somebody.
meters.
Or having
Or
to pay
a
somebody to
person
sit in
to
the booth
collect
and
money.
collect money. So with the
Take
kiosk
cash.
systems, it's a, it's a
Credit
one-time
card.
expense and it's easier, so.
You're not taking coin out. Well,
Right.
our beach,
Because you have to pay for
Whitecrest has
enforcement.
Whitecrest this past year used a, pay to park thing.
Oh, good. It's a trial run for the
Yeah.
town. Makes sense. All right.
That's all I got. Anybody else? Questions,
Okay.
concerns, thoughts?
No.
Good to go.
Year
you.
after year, it does.
Anybody need a mooring?
Just,
No,
yeah.
It's time to ask.
Easy Lyle finds it like that yet?
No interest in owning
Thank you,
a boat.
Mike.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Yes.
Better way to go, you know,
Yep.
if you want.
Thanks. Hole in the water and
Anything I
pour
can't say
money.
Mike's doing it?
Oh, yeah.
Chris, I'm not sure I know how to pronounce your last name. Is it Algier?
All guy.
Allgaier. Well, I wasn't even
Close.
remotely, no. But thank you for your kindness.
Sure.
Chris Allgaier is on the dredging committee,
Yes, I am.
correct?
All right.
Was also the public at our public meeting in
Oh,
December.
I remember that, yes.
So,
I came back for the Milanos.
well, I'm sorry, but it's double stuffed
It's a suitable
Oreos. Would you like
substitute,
one
yeah.
now?
No, no. Yeah.
Plug
There's
your
no such
mouth
thing
up.
as a free lunch.
No, there is. Actually, it'll free cookie anyway.
Okay.
The reason Chris is here is just hopefully to give us an update on where the dredging committee is, or not, as the case may be. And
Sure. To give you an update, the Army Corps of Engineers working on their work plan. It's due 60 days after the budget was signed, which was nominally December the 20th, plus or minus a day. So we're expecting to see that plan by about February 20th. At that time, the dredging task force will schedule a meeting with the Corps of Engineers and go through the details of it once we've had a quick chance to review it. So that's up and coming. GEI did the harbor survey work. They collected the data about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks, and the report is due the end of this week, early next week. And that's a very important report because we really don't know what quantities are involved. All the data that we have is 10 years old, so that's going to be a very important report for us.
that's gonna give you a report on how much blackmail there is and how much silt and
How much
The extent of work.
the extent of dredging, literally.
Right.
Yeah. We have a permit list, so we've just consolidated it so that we can organize it, and we've listed all the permits that we have. We'll keep track of any that have expiration dates. But also, we're starting to go through the conditions of the permits. Many of these were issued, or several of them were issued in 2017. And so there's some follow-up actions with respect to having obtained the permit, so we're starting to go through that.
and these permits are issued to who?
Essentially, well, actually to Mike as harbor master, to the town. Yeah,
Okay.
so, a couple of them are Mass DEP, some of them have been waived, some of them the Conservation Commission. There's about 8 documents if you count the one that was an amendment to an existing one. But as we get closer to the actual performance of the work, we need to understand what the conditions are. Part of our meeting with the Corps will be, we'll take those permits and make sure that they need to include it in their RFP to make the contractors responsible for those portions of the permit that are appropriate. Contingency planning, we would expect the contractors, be it the contractors for the Corps or subsequent to when we do our own work, our own contractor or ourselves if we self-perform, to have contingency planning. The main thing would be an EH&S plan, environmental health and safety, just how you perform the work, and then there'd be a couple of salient points that we want to make sure are included. Obviously, emergency contact information, who has responsibility, who would be the first responders in the event of an incident. A couple of other things, some of which came from the Shellfish Advisory Board, just making sure that all the equipment has food-grade hydraulic oil, so in the event there was a hydraulic hose that bursts, it would only be food-grade hydraulic fluid. Making sure that the scows that we haul it with would be seal tight so there's not a lot of leakage as they transport the dredged spoils out to the bay. And we're developing additional items for that list so that it's comprehensive. We are going to have a coordination meeting with Jack Units, who is the Barnstable County Administrator. He's going to join us on February the 12th. We want to find out what the county is doing with respect to dredging, what the other towns are doing, and if there's any opportunity for equipment. I mean, simply stated, the equipment they have is hydraulic, which we can't use, but maybe we can entice them to provide some other type of equipment. So that'll be the first meeting that the task force has with Barnstable County Administrator. We're starting to do some cost estimates. The key to that will be the quantity development that we get in this report coming from GEI. One of the things we want to talk to Jack about is what contractors are active in the area, what towns are using which contractors. Obviously, availability of equipment is going to be key to our window. We also want to talk to him about if other towns have different windows of opportunity for dredging. So if we move forward with getting some equipment of our own, we'd like to parlay that into leasing it to other towns. But for that to be effective, their dredging windows have to be different than our own. With the exception of when we get to maintenance dredging, that doesn't necessarily have to be, nor would it be, every year. So, for example, we could put ourselves on a 3-year cycle. Years 1 and 2 of that cycle, equipment could be available for other towns. So we're starting to explore those possibilities as well. Maintenance dredging plan, that is on the menu for GEI. They're working on a draft for the maintenance dredging plan. That's something which needs to go to the state.
Who or what is GEI?
Oh, that's the engineering company that is, it used to be Bourne Engineering. They were acquired by GEI probably a couple of years ago, Mike?
Yeah.
So they've been performing the studies. They're the same ones Mike said was doing the fuel tank study.
Yeah.
And a couple of other tasks on behalf of the town. So in addition to the draft maintenance dredging plan, which would be in effect after we complete the initial dredging, especially Kurt Felix on this, he's pretty knowledgeable on some mitigating actions that could become part of that maintenance plan, which would reduce the amount of future dredging that we have to do. So that's on his list of things to do as well.
So, can I ask you a couple of questions?
Yeah, sure.
My understanding was that the Army Corps of Engineers schedule was dependent to some degree on the Senate releasing the money at a certain time. That the Army Corps of Engineers puts together a schedule of what they're going to be doing for, say, the coming year, but they have to know that they have the funding to do it in order to put it on their schedule, and that there was some variance between when the Senate does their business and when the Army Corps of Engineers does theirs. Has that lined up in our favor, such that we can expect them to do it this coming fall?
We're certainly expecting them to, and I think conversations you've had with Craig Martin
Yes.
have confirmed they're on that trajectory, but when you introduce the word Senate,
And I'll say I got this
it's
from
difficult. No, I mean,
I got this from
there's
Dan
no
maybe
certainty.
5 or 6 months ago. We were
Yeah.
talking about timing.
Sure.
It might have even been before the dredging committee got instituted. And he said, oh yeah, but it had something to do with the federal budget being passed and then the Senate appropriating monies for the various departments, but that the Army Corps of Engineers works differently, that they set out their agenda, based on money they actually have in hand. That was my understanding.
That's the thing, Wellfleet got $5 million in Trump's 2020 budget. So the money is there, that's why the Army Corps went ahead with their work plan. And they expect to be dredging in the fall.
Okay,
Okay, good, so we're already funded then. Nice.
good.
So Trump signed the budget, so that's a
Yeah,
done deal.
that's the
That's
thing.
In theory, that was the last step.
Yep.
Yeah, 5-6 months ago, that wasn't the case. It was
Yeah.
still,
Oh,
kind
yeah,
of
no, it
hanging there,
I'm
you
still
know?
not
No,
gonna-
December 20 was when it was approved. That's what triggered the 60-day work plan for the Corps of Engineers.
So then the other
So be
obvious,
that as it may, we'll follow up with
Yeah.
Craig and
So,
just make sure that there's
yeah,
nothing
that's
on,
a minor miracle.
in his organization that he's concerned about with respect to funding.
and then the other shoe dropping is, there was $7.5 million approved at last year's town meeting as a sort of good faith gesture on the part of the town to the state, as I understood it, because we're trying to get matching funds from the state. How are we doing on that front? Is it likely that the state will pony up? And is $15 million even a real number, or do we not know yet?
We'll know better when we get the quantity, and
Yeah.
we'll have to get some prelim pricing. But to answer your basic question there, that's still an open item, would be my characterization of it. Julian and Sarah Peak are well aware of it. The idea is we're hoping for a 50% match, or,
Right.
1-to-1 match, 50% funded. But that's not a done deal yet.
So do we know, and by we, I mean as a town,
Yeah.
do we have a feel for when we will know? What the number is and whether the state will do whatever they're gonna do, 50-50, 60-40, whatever it ends up being. Do we have a sense whether we'll know this year, next year? You know, and I guess the other question that follows from that is, if the Army does their business in the fall of 2020, but we can't get the state to pony up until 2022, say, do we lose anything by waiting a year on the outer harbor? I mean, does it start to fill up, or do we have to just get in there and get the other business done?
Yeah, we have to get in there and get it done.
That's what I would think, right?
Because
Well,
it's
probably
Yeah,
special
30.
town meeting, you're talking about with the shortfall, meaning the
Yeah.
state says, no, I'm giving you funds, but like a year later?
If, yeah. if we-
Or the state says no.
Right, they
Yeah,
say
so
they give a
yeah.
lesser amount, then it would probably be a special town meeting, we'd have to get another.
We have
you
to have to
get
do an
the-
override of some
yeah,
sort to get the money,
to
but
get
you
the
know what,
money
we don't have a
appropriate.
choice.
Exactly.
So, because this has to be done, and it has to be done when the Army Corps,
gotta-
you know,
Yeah,
it's gotta happen when it has to happen.
And we're not ready.
If we have to cover the money, we will have to cover the money.
and that's easy to explain, because you can't,
Right,
people gotta be reasonable.
That's-
really.
yeah.
I mean,
Oh, yeah, I'm not saying no, I'm just saying,
Easy to explain,
It's
but
one-
still unpleasant.
it's one thing to say,
Yeah.
you're in for 7 million, or it's another thing to say you're in for 15, you know?
You know,
Money spent here probably
Right.
doesn't get spent over there maybe, and, you know.
The hope is that it gets, at some point, we do
How
get
much
the
is in
money.
free cash?
The hope is that we do get the money and we're able to, not
Yeah,
continue
exactly.
to hold that
Last year,
back.
SPAT funded coastal studies doing a hydrographic profile of the.
Yeah, GEI reached out to get that data as well, yes.
Nice.
Yeah, so they're
That
gonna,
did include the inner harbor, or did it?
well, it's nothing that you would use to rely upon for construction bids.
Yeah.
So it would be what I, depending on the details and of it, is maybe supporting and correlating data.
Mhm. The other question that may be beyond your purview, and I bring it up every year with Mike, the migration of the sand on Indian Neck goes to the breakwater, goes around the breakwater, and that's what's filling up, and that all came from Indian Neck. What would it take to have CONSCOM involved, to have the town front end loader on a big tide, to take some of that stuff, pile it up, and then put it where it came from on Indian Neck?
It's clean fill?
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's gonna get, well, I don't even know if the federal would even get that far in, because it's like a peninsula that's coming out.
They will do right off the end of the breakwater. But on that buildup on the south side, I don't think they'll touch that.
Well, that would
Keep
keep it from going into the channel, but it came from there.
Yeah,
Or
and well,
groins.
if it's clean, I would think it would open up different opportunities.
Where it came from.
So what would it take to have the town have a rotating CONSCOM permit to, I mean, Mike doesn't want to get involved in it because that would benefit his cottages, but it's besides that.
So you're talking about.
And the conversation always goes, well, no one's gonna listen to me. I said, well, it doesn't matter. It's just
Yeah.
the whole topography of that lay of the land is getting eaten away. And that's where it's going, it's piling up to the breakwater, and it wouldn't take that much effort to, and they do it on Mayo Beach, it migrates underneath the pier. So the town puts the Bobcat down there, then they put it on
Mhm.
Kellett's Corner.
Mhm.
This would be a similar thing on Indian Neck.
So would this be, Bob, would this be part of the,
Maybe.
and the mitigation plan, the plan going forward after the dredging, is that 3-year plan, can you
Well,
add that?
I would even do it in the spring before the.
Well, I mean, could you
dredging.
add it in as part of the dredging mitigation, that,
Well,
what we
that
talked
would-
about 15
right.
years ago, that you're supposed to have interim plans to make sure that the dredging has,
That would save the federal part of the channel.
Although it doesn't sound to me like it's migrating in the area that has to be dredged for other reasons.
It's getting there.
It's getting there, okay,
It's,
so.
if you see
So,
it,
and-
So when it gets a little closer.
to like encompass and
Yeah.
encompass it into the overall,
well,
dredging.
I only bring it up because it's perfectly good beach sand, and that's where it came from.
Yeah, and like I said, that should
Put
afford
it back where it came from.
better opportunities to
Sounds
put
like-
it back, so.
Put it back on
I'll
the
certainly
calendar.
take it as an
charge the
action item and
homeowners.
follow up. I'll get a little history from Mike.
Well, you can see it on a
Yeah.
big minus sign, and it's bigger and bigger.
It's that big.
Yeah, okay.
Chris, I have another dredging question. GEI is doing the consulting study on the maintenance dredging.
Yes, they're doing a draft.
So
maintenance
when, when the dredging committee comes up with what it feels comfortable with as a schedule, and the costs associated with the schedule, will that include, first of all, does maintenance dredging require that the Army Corps of Engineers come back every 3 years if it's a 3-year schedule, or it's only the inner harbor?
Now, the
The
three,
town portion, the
Yeah.
state portion.
Okay.
yeah,
So will the report then put some sort of guesstimate on what it's gonna cost the town every 3 years to do this?
I think we can do that. The report that we're going to get will tell us what the sedimentation rate has been over the last 10 years or so. So we'll do some Jethro math, figure out the annual, and it would appear that there's no reason to get in there every year, mobilize equipment every year, just do it every 3 years. So if the Corps does their work in 20, we do ours in 21 and 22, and then that might put us on the first dredging, maintenance dredging in, say, 25.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that I keep coming back to, and this is partially because of reports that the water and wastewater people have been doing for the last few years, and Nancy just pulled back some of her capital plans because she wants to see what's gonna happen with the dredging. And Kurt Felix has come in and talked about the potential for a sewer system, but if we dredge the harbor, we may get nitrate mitigation from just doing that alone. So it seems like there are all these major potential costs or benefits to the town that are waiting on this project.
Yeah. The
And
nitrogen
we
credits
won't know the benefit until we see.
Yeah.
Once the dredging's done, we'll start to get a sense of whether we captured the benefit, you know, a broader channel for boats, you know, tourists to come in, and, you know, a healthier aquaculture system, and so on, so on, so on. So the sooner we know, obviously the cost, but also the timing of this,
Sure.
the better it is for a lot of other things that we get, that people come to talk to us about, and we say, well, I don't know,
Yeah.
you know, it depends on the
The
dredging.
nitrogen credits, to be specific, that was something that Kurt mentioned just in his recent review of the permits, so that's on our follow-up list of items to see if that would work. The other thing is taking the duckbill, you know, opening up underneath the road there on the backside of the basin. Mayo Creek.
Right.
And I guess maybe there's two phases to that. One might be as simple as just taking the duckbill off and getting a little more flow without getting too dramatic about it. And then phase two would be, do we need a bigger opening there?
Could you clarify for us what the duck bill is?
It's really just a restriction on the existing pipe. The pipe itself is pretty small.
Goes under Commercial Street,
Yeah.
right next to the Pearl, and it goes into
Yeah.
behind.
Oh, that, okay.
Yeah, so the pipe itself
Oh,
is
yeah, yeah.
small and
Yes.
restricted, and then for whatever reason, it's restricted even more.
There's a thing in it that restricts it, and that's what you're
Looks like a
referring
duck
to?
bill.
Yeah, it looks like.
It goes like this.
But it allows-
That was a
I did not make the connection that that
So then
was in the pipe.
won't really get too high.
I assumed that people watching at
So,
home won't die.
So without, I don't want to use metaphors here, like guns to head. When might we, as a FinCom and also as a town, expect the definitive report that says, here's the schedule, here are the costs, as far out as we have vision anyway, even if we don't know for sure what the maintenance issues are, but at least for the initial thing, we'll know, yep, 2020 fall, feds come in, 2021, we do the other part, it's gonna cost this much. When might we expect to know those answers, you think?
I'd say maybe the fall.
Well,
So not by town meeting, for one thing,
Yeah, when's town meeting?
by April.
Yeah, no, that would be a real swag on the
Okay.
cost. It would probably,
Well, plus the state, I mean, that's a crapshoot, right?
yeah. Yeah, but what we will take as action items is, we'll talk to Craig Martin to make sure there's nothing that precludes the funding. You know, the core is fully funded, and if there's any initiating events, we'll have them identify those so we can track them. I'll follow up on what the state approval funding timeline is and what has to happen for us to get a definitive answer on how much matching funds we'll get.
Yeah, I had heard that the person who was overseeing and was inclined towards us left the job, and someone new was now in that position.
Yeah, it
That I guess
was.
Julian and Sarah and others are getting to know
Ed
better.
O'Donnell was the,
The-
well, yeah, chief engineer at the Corps. He retired.
No, but at the state level.
at the state level too,
At the
yeah.
state level, someone that Dennis knows very well, I think recently left.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So could I just, this was the rumor going around the marina. Last time around, we missed it by one permit last year. Was that true or
No,
not? No. Okay.
I think
Because last year
We
we
missed it
were almost
because
there, right?
they
It was,
decided to ignore us.
Yeah, okay.
Because those damn pilgrims.
Yeah.
No, I'm thinking that might have to do with the fact that this is a blue town,
Oh, I thought it was
and
Plymouth's
this is
four.
the federal.
I thought it was
no,
Plymouth's
it's-
400th anniversary or
it
something.
was, that's what
That
it
put the
was.
kibosh on us
And
last
they
year.
dredged up there instead of coming to.
Yeah,
us.
that's what.
Duxbury, right? Where didn't,
No,
who got
Plymouth,
it?
right?
No, Plymouth.
Plymouth.
400th anniversary,
Oh,
pilgrims,
Oh,
you
that.
know, turkey, the whole deal. They had all of the
Plymouth
chits.
has always had better PR than
It is,
any
it's
place
all-
out here.
They got a rock. What do we got? You know,
I went to
They have a
see the
new-
rock
They have a new.
It's
for the first time.
they got a new kind of rock.
yeah, but the rock is pretty
Underwhelming.
underwhelming.
Yeah, it really is. The old Mayflower's not bad.
Yeah, that looks nice.
So the silt happens, as my thinking goes.
That's a great bumper sticker, Bob.
Silt happens.
Silt happens.
Silt happens. I think we should grab that and
T-shirts
sell
go
it.
for- and it's accelerating, so if you have nitrogen feeding food, microalgae, and that food doesn't get consumed, it just settles to the bottom, and that's what we're dredging. Is that your understanding?
I think probably so, yeah.
So the more nitrogen we have, the faster this is happening, the faster
Right.
it's, I heard 9 inches a year is what's happening.
Nice.
That's
I haven't heard it in depth, but I've heard 10 or 12,000 yards a year. Cubic yards.
It's daunting.
It's not.
Yeah.
And if you mitigate the nitrogen, it's gonna slow the process of filling up again to be re-dredged. So that's why it's all connected.
How many
No, there's,
silt-
I mean,
Yeah,
there's
it's right.
obvious goodness in doing this as soon as we can.
No, like I said,
It's-
Kurt had some very good observations about additional aspects that we should include in the maintenance dredging plan to preventative measures
Mhm.
to do
Was
that
there
very thing.
anything mentioned about that train trestle too, back in Duck Creek? Was that to open?
Not
I think that was one, what did I
Like-
hear?
Yeah, no, that's been,
Yeah.
In terms of flow,
flow.
it would kind of clean out.
Yeah,
Duck
Kurt mentioned
Creek too.
that it would make a big credit for our nitrogen mitigation, but it has to get taken by eminent domain, you gotta
Oh,
buy the
right,
property
you
because
have
it's
to-
privately owned.
I know.
The trestle itself,
Yeah,
Yeah, it's owned by,
the right of way is?
yeah. On, at least on the commercial street side, I don't know what's happening on the Route 6 side.
But where it actually crosses the waterway, it's privately owned?
Oh, no, it goes right up to the shore of the channel, but all the way up to that.
Okay.
Get removed.
Yeah, okay.
But whoever bought the property from Dave Francis, that built that house next to
Max.
Max,
Yeah.
owns all the way to the channel. So that would have to get taken.
I got nothing else. How about you guys?
Nope.
I'm good. That was a great presentation. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you very
Thank
much.
you for your
Well, to both of you.
diligence on that. Yeah, really,
Yeah.
it's a huge project. It's a
And
huge
really critical
undertaking.
to the town,
Yeah,
obviously.
absolutely.
Well,
All right,
thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Again, I don't think we need to do anything on strategic planning tonight, because a lot of what we just talked about impinges on that, and it'll make its way to whatever report we do. Anybody have a liaison report of any kind? We have no correspondence, we're not going to read the minutes tonight, there are no transfers. Other
do
business?
we have minutes tonight?
No,
Because
because
I know Rebecca
Rebecca's
is out of
watching,
commission.
say hi to Rebecca once again.
Hi, Rebecca.
Get well.
We miss you.
Minutes will be forthcoming when they're forthcoming.
That's fine, I was just
Yeah, we-
checking because I don't have them and I didn't see them, so.
Correct.
She was late to the party.
Yes, well, I'm sorry, I got home from work at 6:10 and I had to shower and eat.
And thank you for that.
Yes, trust me.
So,
Shower a specialty.
if there is no other business, I'm going to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Great.
Second?
Second.
Okay.
Second.
All those?
Yes.
Yay. Thank you.